we consider knowledge firstly cerebral, and one definition of what knowledge means, you know and and that's really the hacking down of pluralism. There are so many ways of knowing and seeing in society on this planet, and not just among human beings, among other creatures also. And that kind of plurality, school, it's not about school holding it, but then it doesn't end up communicating it, and that's a real problem with the textbook culture.
Lights, Camera, Azadi is a show that is on a quest to meet personalities. The personalities who have always challenged the status quo. These people are courageous and confident to speak the truth and are best at it. Though the world may or may not agree with them, they always work for nation building. We want to talk to them and understand their perspective. We want to know their worldview, their thoughts, and what gaps do they see in the society, and most importantly, how to live life fearlessly. My name is Vandit Jain, and I'm just a medium to get these stories to you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 36th episode of Lights Camera Azadi, which also happens to be the 7th episode of season 2 and the third consecutive episode that we are doing in English. I miss speaking in Hindi as well, but we are diversifying the show, and India is not just Hindi. In today's episode, we take a step forward and go a little deeper in the climate movement. Yuvan Aves is a Chennai based climate activist and naturalist, and we try to understand from him the issues that he is witnessing around India's coastline. He is a naturalist and lives very close to the environment. He talks passionately about education, which brings a unique flavor in this conversation. This was an interesting conversation as it allowed me to explore depths of the climate movement that I wasn't aware of. Though we explicitly didn't talk about climate change, but after listening to Dr. Joy's conversation, you can draw connections. So, without wasting any time, presenting to you Yuvan Aves. Also, please subscribe to us on YouTube, hit follow if you're listening on Spotify, follow us on Instagram, and if you want to connect with me on Twitter, my Twitter handle is THOONEDIT. Thank you. Hi all. Lights Camera Azadi is a year old now. While I do this effort part time and after office hours and on weekends, the truth is, I haven't made any money out of it. If you think what I do is worth it, it adds value in your existing knowledge base, and you want me to continue doing this, I request you to please support me for any episode that you like. You can go to patreon.com/azadi and make any contribution, big or small, of your choice. To just make a one-time contribution, cancel the charges after you have paid. Your small contribution can go a long way in my endeavor to bring stories to you. This episode is brought to you by Miva Naturals. Miva is a homemade brand dedicated to your personal care experience. Miva make products with dedication, love, and with a touch of nature. They don't use any chemicals or harmful substances in their products to ensure you get the best feeling, which is long lasting. Miva makes products which are colorful and are fun to use, and it aims to be your best experience in the whole day. If you'd like to order your first Miva product, please go to miva.co.in and insert the code AZADI during checkout and get instant 20% off. So, what are you waiting for? Yuvan, please, and it's a pleasure to have you on Lights Camera Azadi. Welcome.
Thank you, Vandit. I'm quite happy to be here.
Uh, Thank you.
Mhm.
Yuvan, can you tell me what you do? And though we love your posts on Instagram, can you also,
Mhm.
throw some peek in your life as such?
Huh. So yeah, firstly, wishes from warm Chennai, which is warm in the afternoons and kind of misty in the mornings and evenings as we move into summer. I call myself a naturalist, educator, activist, writer. I do a mishmash of all these things, and a large part of my work is bringing nature education, citizenship education uh, to children and students and people across ages. And this is through interactions through school, this is through writing. Um, yeah, that's the way I would broadly describe myself.
And is this your own development? Is this word and naturalist is something which you have developed, or is this like a dictionary word? I've not heard before.
So naturalist is quite a off-used words, at least in the circles of people who are studying natural history, biologists, ecologists. The way I use the word is slightly different. It is a word which encompasses the principles I hold central to life, which is um, the importance of living with a deep and intelligent oneness with the earth, with fellow human beings, with other kinds of life. Having a sense of wonder, having a sense of kinship, joy, responsibility, um, and in that sense, that my work becomes my spirituality, and that's how I kind of describe myself as a naturalist. Although it also means somebody who, as a profession, knows a whole lot about birds and snakes and butterflies and trees and tells people about them, takes them on walks, is a tour guide, and so on. But for me, it's really a value system, a core set of principles which I hold close and ground my work and life around.
And are you born and brought up in Chennai only?
Yes, I'm from Chennai and Tamil Nadu.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And what chain of events led you to become a naturalist? Was it a childhood passion, or was it a gradual discovery, post college, etc.?
So I've been blessed with a childhood in a Krishnamurthy school. Krishnamurthy is a philosopher and educator who spoke about finding one's own path. He said, truth is a pathless land. No organization or religion or guru can lead you to the truth. You have to be a light onto yourself. And he, in his talks with students, he would say, question every answer. And so for him, it was his philosophy was about incisively questioning uh, oneself, looking into oneself, and uh, non-conformity was very central to the philosophy of a Krishnamurthy school. So I grew up there, and a lot of my teachers were deeply passionate about nature, and they were, part of the conservation movement, and all that. And that was a place, where naturally people who had a concern for environment, a concern for society, would kind of congregate. Either they would be working there, or they would come as guests. So I was very, very early, when I was 2 or 3, my mom would recount stories of me, catching lizards, going behind goats and cows and getting lost. Uh, Even before my own memory of mm, my childhood, there were stories of like these I would listen to. So then that was nourished through my schooling, and then it later on also I deeply grounded myself in that. So I would call it, sometimes a passion is something we grow, and maybe sometimes we're kind of born with it, in a certain context, and in a uh, something comes with us. And for me it was a really a combination of both, and uh, I've been lucky to have that kind of early childhood.
And this is very interesting. I mean, I have this is a the Krishnamurti school of thought. I have a very limited knowledge. Can you tell me a little bit about your time? What was it like? How was it different from conventional school? And what was it? Is it more like the ancient Gurukul system that we hear of, or is it something different?
Yeah. So, like any school, there are a lot of alternative philosophers.
Hmm.
There's Krishnamurti, there is Maria Montessori, there is Rudolf Steiner, there is Waldorf, Paulo Freire. A lot of people who reimagined education. These people, a commonality between all of them is that They created humane education systems where the child mattered, where the human being mattered, where the environment and the living earth mattered, because they lived through the worst period of human history, which was the two world wars. And they said there is something fundamentally wrong with the value systems societies and people are rooted in, or the authorities or the states are rooted in. And um, how can we rethink this, reimagine this? And different people came up with their own uh, systems of far more holistic, inclusive, humane, um, educational pedagogies, and Krishnamurthy was one of them. And for me, he's spoken a lot. Uh, One of the most appealing thing for me is how he talks about truth is a pathless land. And among all the various philosophers, rarely does one say, "Don't follow me." In one talk, he says, "These are my teachings. Tear them to shreds. Be a light unto yourself." So that sense of abandon, of setting free, you know, uh, that was really a very nurturing ground for me in a Krishnamurti school. Of course, different people go through these schools and come out differently, but then they develop a capacity to discover oneself as one is, and and also ask questions, and also have the courage to participate, and uh, be active in larger conversations. And these are the spaces different alternative schools are creating. Uh, and that is in stark contrast to a lot of mainstream schooling thinking, where the child is treated as a raw material, like in an industrial system, like a rock or like bauxite, where you um, model her or him into a certain product for the market, for the economy, and push him through those, um, him or her through those 12, 14, 15 years. Um,
Yuvan, every
mhm,
since we are talking about education and you went through one model of education, tell me how
mhm,
do you look at the broader Indian Desi education system in general, and how what flaws are you spotting, and you know about what are you looking to change in the near future around it?
mhm, mhm. No, I think it's important to understand where our current education system came from. When there was the Industrial Revolution, the colonial powers, the scientific institutions, and the educational institutions worked in tandem. So, science had a way of functioning, education had a way of functioning, which was to create people who would fuel the educational revolution. So, the human being did not matter. They wanted a certain kind of work, a certain kind of labor, which would um, power up more these forces, which were either, that model of education where you take people, treat them as raw material, as inert passive beings, and shape them into something which would feed your larger economic system, um, is really the kind of model for today's mainstream education system. Refreshingly, there are so many alternative institutions which are coming up. There's Swaraj University, there are the Krishnamurthy schools, the Montessori schools. There are places like Bhumi College, Shikshantar, and so on. So many others, small and large. Um, but what the problem here is that we are seeing is these institutions are system centric. They uh, they serve, or they rather intend to fuel the larger market, the larger economy, and so on. So in its philosophy, the individual, one's own personal reality, capabilities, social context does not matter. So this is typical of what we call a top down system. Somebody, for instance, if there is a ICSE school, somebody in Delhi makes a syllabus for the entire nation. Whether a child is urban child, fish from a fishing community, a farmer community, any the various other socio-cultural contexts, it doesn't matter. Everybody studies the same thing in the same lens, and knowledge is given a mono theme. A single idea of what knowledge should mean is
Hmm.
propagated, and that is really the central problem with mainstream educations, and the problem being monoculture. If you take a metaphor of a natural ecosystem, the fundamental principle of nature, if there is an ecology which is most stable and resilient, it is when it is most diverse. And that is true of society as well. A measure of how inclusive or how democratic a society is how diverse it is. Can different realities, voices, uh, coexist? E- and so, mainstream education does not really address that. In fact, goes counter to the idea of diversity, a natural reality in human beings. um, yeah, that would really be the central and big problem with mainstream education.
Yeah, yeah. As you were speaking, I was trying to recall my own education, and
Hmm,
yes, it never focused on diversity. It never focused on plurality.
hmm, hmm,
We had one uniform. We had to wear it every day for the 12,
hmm,
13 years of our life, and
hmm,
I don't recall having the courage to question uh, or the set truths that were propagated in the classrooms. I don't.
hmm,
I think our faculty was also not a lot diverse. I mean, they were diverse, but decently diverse. Not a lot of diversity was present, and
hmm,
it felt like you go to any CBSE school in the country, more or less. I think you would have the same atmosphere, same thought process, and I think the only difference would be of class, because every school with its own fee structure accommodates
hmm,
a different set of class from the local community. I think that
hmm,
is the only difference you would make, but you can probably sit in any other classroom of any CBSE school, and
hmm,
I think you will be fine.
hmm. That would be true, but the only the textbooks and perhaps the teaching perhaps would be fine. But the underlying reality of what the people are like, what their ideas are, that would really change the theme. But sometimes one also sees that this does not really fit or is accommodated within the syllabus, because there is one thing everywhere. It's like, what Ken Robinson says, one shirt size doesn't fit all, kind of a thing.
Hmm.
you know hmm.
Are you also working with any of the local schools there?
Yeah, so I go as a resource person for a lot of schools. In fact, in my class 11 and 12, let me tell you about my own educational journey.
Hmm.
Just to give a bit of context, I walked out of conventional schooling when I was 16. And I told the principal of my school, see, I can educate myself. I don't need teachers. I don't need this thing. And at the same time, I was facing some. Uh, I was under a physically abusive stepfather, so I left home. And I told the principal of my school this, and he had started another Krishnamurthy school, a 100-acre campus called Patashala. And he said, okay, come over here. You can educate yourself. You can do, other kinds of work, with the village and with the children and so on. So my 11th and 12th, I did entirely on my own. So if I had doubts, I would call up people, teachers, and say, hey, I want to fix up this time. I want to clarify these doubts. I would travel to another school to do my practical classes. I registered in one more school to go and write my exams. So I educated myself entirely. And that was a really formative time for me, because um, I could do a whole range of things. I trained myself as a musician. I did extraordinary biodiversity documentation in that landscape of Kanchipuram, Chengalpet. And through my 11th and 12th, the other thing I did was in three village schools around our campus, government schools. I did science workshops, and my what you call core intention was to link their science curriculum, which is far fetched from the reality of these children, who are from the village. Either their parents are farmers, working laborers, from the local panchayat, and so on. Is far fetched from the reality, from the fields and the lakes and the forests around. It's a rich place ecologically, culturally they were living in. But then there was this alien thing the textbook was speaking about. I mean, there are a lot of good things about the textbook curriculum, but the thing is, it is one lens which is given regardless of the ground reality of children, across India, or across a large part of the country. So I did these science workshops to kind of link what they learnt in science to the local landscape, to daily activities which were happening in the village. Uh, we made a butterfly garden, a medicinal garden. We made these activity cards which children will look at, go find, and kind of bridge uh, their reality with the curriculum. So. Uh, that's how I started off into my teaching experience. After which I taught in Pathashala itself, and taught in other places, and I continue to be a teacher.
Wow. You did what we all wanted to do, just leave our school after our 10th and become that rebel and do something on our own. And
Mm.
probably, yeah, that would be a tough, challenge that you have taken on yourself. And kudos to you.
Mm.
You went a very
No,
long way.
but I'll tell you how that dawned. What became very clear. For instance, I read a lot. I would read Tim Ferriss. There was this man called Josh Waitzkin who wrote The Art of Learning.
Hmm.
Schools don't teach you how to learn. Because if you feel passion, if you have drive to learn something, for a cause, or for something you're deeply concerned about or passionate about, you don't need to be taught that. Let's say, oh, for instance, I'm an activist, and for my campaign, uh, I have to learn something. I go read the laws.
Hmm.
Within a few months, I become an expert in that little, what do you call, chapter, a few chapters of that specific law. I don't need to go to law school for that, or some other. So what schools don't teach is how to learn. And if
Hmm.
one can empower the child with the tools of learning, and that's something I kind of explored and learned early, then you don't need to teach me physics and mathematics except for very basic skills. And then I would follow what I'm deeply concerned about, or what how my life's path is unfolding. So that played a part in me able to have the confidence. One uh, part of that confidence came from knowing how to learn.
Very true. No, I think often, as a thought experiment, even I have tried to reimagine a schooling system where, essentially you do not have classes as such, but you would have levels of learning where one child can step in and choose any of the field, and we can have diverse field from it can range from, yeah, learning chess to learning animation to learning something else.
Mm,
And you choose your own learning path, and then you grow
mm,
in that, and it doesn't matter if you are 8 years old or 10 years old or 12 years old. I mean,
mm,
you can begin from the beginning, and by the time you leave school you would have ample of learning. I mean, that is one way I
mm,
always thought, if we can build our education system around it, that would be very,
mm,
very, I think, life changing for kids at least.
mm. Absolutely.
Yeah. Tell me, how do you look at the textbook culture? I mean, as students, we were also very, very, very anti textbook culture. We would always have this notion that, oh, that schools always focus on theory. It rarely focuses on practical. You go to
mm,
any school in India, at least during my
mm,
time, and some
mm,
enlightened kid would always raise this concern that, oh, there are no
mm,
practicals. And I think what schools started to do, they started to have practical labs, which were
mm,
more a little bit of practicality, but it was
mm,
still not that. I mean, I remember once I was in college in first year, and we were learning the civil engineering, and
mm,
they took us on the field and they tried to tell us, okay, how to do a survey. And it
mm.
became an arena to probably have fun, run around, play games, but I don't remember if anybody did a survey that time or not. But yeah, my memories are filled with such ideas. And you talking about it, part of
Mm,
me also makes me nostalgic, and also gives me hope that
mm,
maybe the future generation will have better schooling. uh so yeah,
mm.
how do you look at this textbook culture in general?
Yeah. Um. I tomorrow I'm taking a group of children on a snake walk with the Irula tribals. The Irulas are, a lot of them, the conventional cells, they are not educated. The Under the central government, they've been classified as primitive tribes. But then I've worked with them closely, and they will see sand, yeah, and people would have walked on that sand, cattle would have walked on that sand, vehicles would have gone. They will spot a snake track, and they will say, okay, this saw-scaled viper in the night has gone this direction. It's drunk water in that lake and it's come back and lying in that burrow there. And you go
Wow.
there, the snake is there.
Yeah.
You know,
Wow.
I work a lot with fisher people, and here in Urur and Alcott Kuppam, I've interacted with the children there, from the fishing communities. The 11-year-old, 12-year-old child will plainly say what the tide is, whether it's a rising tide, low tide, which I will have to kind of look at the internet and see, or plainly be able to predict meteorologically what's going to happen that day, how that day is going to be, whether it's good for fishing or not, you know. So we consider knowledge firstly cerebral, and one definition of what knowledge means, you know and that's really the hacking down of pluralism. There are so many ways of knowing and seeing in society on this planet, and not just among human beings, among other creatures also. And that kind of plurality, school, it's not about school holding it, but then it doesn't end up communicating it. And that's a real problem with the textbook culture, because it tells you that this is knowledge and this is not. um, the kind of, for instance, knowledge need not be in the brain, it can be embodied, it can be in the muscles. Um, it can be in the way you work with soil, or you work with uh, other kinds of things, with clay and with tools, um, and so on. So eh, there's a problem, a very fundamental issue with schools which have a standard curriculum, is that it is not ground up. And when a system is not ground up, and what I mean to say, when something is ground up, is that the curriculum, the pedagogy, the schooling atmosphere is determined by the place it is in, by the people who are in it, by the socio-cultural political context which is prevalent and strong there, um, and with values of which are humane, which address in an intelligent way what the world is going on right now. And if it you know if that does not grow from where that school, that people are placed in, but then its pedagogy is dictated from some system located elsewhere, then it's going to be a monoculture system, and monoculture is dangerous for society. Monoculture is a agricultural term. If the way to translate monoculture in a social context is indoctrination. So monoculture in
Hmm.
society is indoctrination. So yeah, that's really the problem I see.
And what do you think of these uh, central boards? I said I'm taking a little digression because we are speaking
Hmm,
about a topic.
hmm,
Do
hmm,
you think so, like you mentioned also, that somebody sitting in Delhi is designing a curriculum for the complete country?
hmm, hmm.
How relevant it will be, what will it have? Can they address issues probably faced locally, or can they bring unique philosophies and perspective that would be
Hmm.
relevant in, let's say, Chennai, or I mean Gurgaon, something like that? Or do you think school should be left autonomous? I mean, where do you draw the line?
Beyond a broad framework of what uh, of a few essential subjects and a few essential skills, schools, you know education must grow ground up. If I'm sitting in Chennai, I want to learn about the habitat here. I want to learn about the people here. I want to be able to respect my language. One of the things I'm sure you face, perhaps in your own state as well, is that when you speak Tamil, um, it's not very cool. And some schools you got to speak English. You can't speak Tamil. Some schools put a fine.
Yeah,
Now there's a
yeah,
problem
there's
there. Yeah,
colonial mindset at its
yeah.
peak.
Mhm. There's a problem is language is, the great Indian linguist G.N. Devi. He talks about how each language is a unique worldview, and a complete kind of cognition of that people, of that place. For instance, I'm very interested in this reciprocity, this mutuality between language and landscape. And I collect words when I travel to places. I collect lexicon which is unique to that place. For instance, in Tamil Nadu, I have a collection of 140 words for land alone.
Wow.
Land in its poetic significance, in its ecological and cultural significance, seasonality, and so on. About a handful of them I can translate in English. There are about 40 to 50 words of water bodies in Tamil Nadu. Given the kind of landscape it is, it needs to be extremely conscious about water conservation systems because it's an agrarian land, and there's no way you can um, translate that into English, which is not from here. And what happens when another language comes here is that it breeds an amnesia. We don't know how to engage with this land and to kind of live in it sensibly, because land births language in many ways. In Sikkim, where I've interacted with the Lepcha community. They have a very interesting Genesis story, which are Genesis stories are very important to kind of form the worldview of different communities. For them, there's no heaven or hell, which is a biblical concept which arose elsewhere. For them, the first man and woman were made of pure snow by the god mother Itbumu in the mountain Kanchenjunga. And when the Lepcha people die, they believe that they go up the Teesta River and reach Kanchenjunga again. Their entire
Hmm.
cosmology is rooted in their landscape, their rivers, their mountains, and their forests. And an erasure of that, you can imagine what would happen. Uh, you forget about the landscape. It's a Himalayan landscape, and you don't know how to live there. You would uh, obviously the state forces don't know or don't signify these local lexicon and stories as much, and they build dams and they build power projects and so on. And we saw what happened in Uttarakhand recently, glacial outbursts and breakage of dams.
Hmm.
And the Lepcha community is really at the forefront of fighting the stage fight Tista Dam project.
Yeah,
For
yeah.
them, the river is a living being.
Hmm.
It's animate. Saying you're clotting its throat. How can we let that happen? Now that wouldn't even make sense to a minister, for instance, um, who has a different worldview, which is not birthed from that land, from that context. And I see the parallel problem in education of indoctrinating one worldview in a country which is uh, astonishingly diverse.
Very well said, you. And I think
Mm,
this the issue of indigenous communities, where and this is I have the more I do my podcast and my sort of my research, I encounter this a lot, where and I think this also something similar came up when Aarti Kumar Rao's episode as well,
mm,
where there would be an indigenous community, and I think this was her expedition towards core of Rajasthan, where where what has
mm,
happened is during the probably in 80s, Indira Gandhi water canal was built to bring in water the from I think Bias river till all the way to Rajasthan, and it miserably failed. And
mm,
rather than what the indigenous community did is they found their own water conservation measures. And
mm,
I had the same thought that time, that there is such a wide gap between our policy making, our actions, and what is
mm,
happening on ground, that sometimes the
mm,
Indian state feels as if it is massively disconnected from the roots of our society. And
mm.
yeah, I think that's a brilliant example you have also shared as well. Do you also have more? I think you have traveled quite a bit,
Mm.
and my question is, where what all areas you have covered, and do you have more such stories for us?
Yeah. So what I'm currently on is a journey along the Indian coastline, and this really started about 2 years ago when I started participating in the Save Pulicat campaign. Um, Pulicat is a huge lagoon, on kind of spreading across Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh, and it's really a mosaic of social and ecological realities. So there is three rivers flow in this place: Arani, Kosastalayar, and Kalangi, and they go into the lagoon. And then here you find sand dunes, mud flats, beaches, tropical dry evergreen forest. Uh, there's estuary and the fisher people and the farming communities. This place, um, hosts is extraordinary. Um, but this is really north of Tamil Nadu, and if you look at the people living here, the livelihoods and also the number of people living here is very large. But then um, from the colonial times, north of Tamil Nadu, north of Chennai, actually, they called it Black Town because these were people who did not have, in the conventional sense, financial power, political power. So, this is a word I try to propagate and speak more often about, and it's called discriminatory development. Where do I choose to cite my dirty industry, my power plant, my petrochemical factory, my pharmaceutical factory? If you look at Chennai, it was the south. All the zamindars and the rich people lived, and to the north, the fisher folk, the farmers, people classified under the ST and the SC lived. And if you look at all the Chennai's thermal power stations, the pharmaceutical industries, all the red list category industries, they were located in North Chennai. Chennai's largest landfill, it's 280 acres in Kodungayur. It's again in North Chennai. More people live there. And if you look at why it's there, is because you can push your power there and people do not have as much voice to dissent and oppose. While you
Hmm.
do the same thing in South Chennai, people can throw you out of power, because they were wealthy
Political
as such.
economy is, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm calling that discriminatory development, and the Pulicat campaign, what it was. So our ports were built there, and most recently, just under Pulicat Lagoon, which is a bird sanctuary, nominated for a Ramsar site. It's ecologically very rich, and a lagoon is a sheltered marine space. So a lot of marine life comes into the lagoon to breed. A lot of migratory birds from different parts of the world come here during the winter. So this port, which is now proposed by Adani, is 6,000 acres as part of the Sagar Mala project, which the central government has proposed. To have ports every 20 kilometers along the Indian coastline. Um, it romanticizes it with the word Sagar Mala, Mala meaning garland. But ports, what they do is they displace people, they erode coastlines, they feed a certain you know class of people, and those realities are of course not spoken about in the policy. So this is a huge port which is coming just 2.1 kilometers south of Pulicat Lagoon. And if one understands the coastal dynamics here, what it would end up doing is that 3,000 acres of it will be jutting into the sea. New land will be made, and which would end up eroding the sand barrier islands protecting Pulicat Lagoon, merging it with the sea. So just vanquishing that huge bioregion. So, trying to understand the politics and the ground realities of that place made me want to travel to other places in Tamil Nadu. Today we were in Kaliveli. We spent half a day uh, where another fishing harbor is proposed, and we are documenting what life is found there, what the local livelihoods are like. We found a huge whale backbone, washed ashore. A little piece of bone. There were only about five vertebrae in it, but it was longer than me. Fantastic to see today. And a little, a few months ago, I was in Goa, Kerala, uh, so the travel is continuing to understand the changing coastal geography of India, which has a 7,500 kilometer coastline, and coasts literally are on the margins, and and very, philosophically as such, coastal communities are marginalized. And when there is a natural disaster, people here, ecologies here are most vulnerable. And to understand what these regions are going through is to really kind of study the worst brunt of our policy decisions, developmental projects, and so on. So
Mm.
that's something I'm kind of actively working on right now.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned this in the Sanctuary Nature Foundation as well. And I quote, all this is beyond comprehension given what we know about the impact of climate change on human safety. But possibly the greatest danger may come from the choice of location. Planned to be India's largest port project, it could obliterate much of Pulicat and perhaps erase it from our maps.
Mm,
Expert environmental and societal advocate Nityanand Jairam says the imposed port will trigger erosion of Sand Barrier Island, merging the Pulicat Lagoon with the Bay of Bengal. And if the eroding effect spread further north, the sea will get close to the launching site of the ISRO, which is merely
mm,
800 meters from the water line on Sri Harikota Island.
mm. Yeah, that's our launching site.
Yeah, yeah.
That's our
That's only
that's
when they'll realize
endangered as well.
when
Yeah.
yeah,
Huh.
when the tides come near Sri Harikota is when people will realize, okay, something has been
Yeah.
wrong. But
Mm,
you want to tell me this? I mean, this is this how do I put it? This war, this fight between economics and economy and development versus
mm,
saving the local community, indigenous communities, history,
mm,
culture, heritage. Uh, I mean,
mm,
sooner or later, as India's trade grows, we would need ports.
mm,
Uh, and uh,
mm,
and any I think if when we look at other developed countries, they have invested massively in ports as well, especially the ones with
mm,
large coastlines. and
mm,
Indian ports are good, but they're still not world class.
mm.
So how do you look at this fight between the two? How do we balance it out? Are we to say that we should be very very cautious while developing? Is that your point, or we should be saying that when
No,
it
Vandit. So there's I'll tell you the numbers because the argument which is being presented is not a valid one. I'll tell you the
Hmm,
reality with Pulicat, and that's the reality with everybody or across the country, whether it be ports, dams, whether it be the double tracking of the railroad in Molem, which right now Goa is having a power surplus. And why would you want to mine coal? When you say we need coal, who is the we? The coal would make Jindal and Adani, Vedanta richer. Absolutely. Good for
hmm,
them. But not the common man, not the larger population of people. And there is no economic economy itself. The idea of economy as theorized by Adam Smith has its colonial roots and realities. But if we were to even ignore that for the time being, what is happening in Goa is not economic. I'll tell you the same is true for the Pulicat port. You know, the Adani port which is being proposed is 320 MTPA. MTPA means million tons per annum. Ports have something called a cargo capacity. Tamil Nadu has four major ports: the Chennai port, Yennur port, Marg, and in Thoothukudi. All four ports put together, their cargo capacity is 275 MTPA, and an annual average of 130 MTPA is only used. That's all is the state's demand. Now,
hmm,
the Adani port alone is 320 MTPA. It makes no economic sense
hmm,
unless that company wants to bring in Australian coal into India more easily.
hmm.
That's the only rationale there. So economy here, there is no economic argument when it comes to the kind of developmental regime uh, which we are seeing, unless it is to make certain players billionaires and trillionaires. That's the only economic rationale here, not for the common public, not for the common good at all.
Hmm, hmm, hmm. So you are saying that when you go and look at the nuances of it, you would probably see
Hmm.
that this is a one-sided development. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, it's discriminatory development. So it's not
Hmm,
development for the 10 lakh fisher folk who are living around Pulicat and whose
hmm,
livelihoods and lives would be decimated. Now,
hmm,
Pulicat is also Chennai's largest flood catchment, which means when Chennai receives torrential rains during 3 months of monsoon, Pulicat actually receives much of the water, and a large part of this port would block the Kosastalya River, which conveys the water to Pulicat. So, people, upper middle class people like me would also get affected. I'll be flooded. In fact, each monsoon, my place is flooded. So,
hmm,
uh, i- if you look at the nuances, if you study the reports in detail, you will find that the model of development we are following is discriminatory against people, against other forms of life, against intergenerationally discriminatory, against future generations and so on. And that is, I'm speaking as somebody who's been part of a lot of campaigns and studied a lot of EIAs and executive summaries and project plans. This is almost always the reality.
No, you're right. I mean, I completely understand,
Hmm.
you know where you're coming from. But what I'm also trying to think, Yuvan, is uh, and what is that the model of development that we should follow? I mean, do you have some thoughts around it?
Yeah. So, you know, we are very much attached to the colonial model of things. You know, it is a few ruling and deciding for the
For
most.
many. Hmm.
Yeah. And, whether it be development, whether it be education, whether it be what we decide is a good life and well-being for us in our own places and contexts, unless systems are ground up, emerging from the realities prevalent, there, any kind of model with the best of intentions. I'm not saying they are of the best of intentions right now, but even if they were so, will be a form of violence, because it will be blind to the specific context of uh, a subcontinent with so many socio-cultural realities and ecologies. A top-down, I mean, this is something radical, in the sense that governance is not thought about in this way. Governance is about some people holding power and calling the shots and deciding for the rest. But if governance doesn't grow ground up, then they cannot be a kind of a real democracy. But then these kinds of governance systems is not really a utopia. We are seeing it in so many places. You take Gadchiroli in Maharashtra, you take Munsiari in Uttarakhand, you take so many other processes, panchayats, village systems, where people are adopting self-governance, and beautiful things come out of it. They're not perfect, but then they are rooted in the specific contextual realities of that place. And I think the real solutions lie there. But then we don't, that model of development is uh, uncomfortable for a power hungry, power greedy kind of governance. If I want to hold power over the country, then I cannot let the context and ground realities grow from where they are. So that's really a very, very large political question we are dealing with.
Hmm. And I'm just trying to take a slight digression. Uh,
Hmm.
do you and how do you look at free market economics? From what I want to understand is, do you think this is a step forward, or do you have your reservations towards it?
Yeah. So, the free market economy and the economic theory itself came from, the Wealth of Nations. Adam Smith, he himself said,
Hmm.
uh, uh, the economic system survives by creating scarcity. So scarcity is gold, is diamond, is oil, and so on. And other people who built on property and economy and what it means. For instance, John Locke or Thomas Hobbes. John Locke brought in the fact that land can be waste, not in a single indigenous Indian community's worldview. Land is waste. In lot of Indian culture, land is animate. Has agency. It has a voice of its own. It
Hmm.
can decide. It can see. It can speak. The concept of land being useless, just lying there, came from a colonial worldview. In Tamil Nadu, there's a word called porambok. Right now it's a bad word. It's you don't speak it in public, but the porambok means land which is common. The river, the lake, the mud flats, the sand dunes. These are places which are commonly owned and which cannot be privatized or taken over by anybody, because it is everybody's, and their functions and services are such. But then when the British came in, they changed that word poromboku into land, which means waste. It's not doing anything. Hey, build something over it. Do something over it. So now people use it as a bad word to call somebody who's useless. Poromboku. But then we are trying to change uh, what that word means. So, there are a lot of problems with the colonial model of economy, and something I'm personally interested is also what it does to human psychology, not just society and culture, but what does it do to our brains and our minds? If you read, there's a beautiful book called The Spirit Level, written by extraordinary sociologist Richard Wilkinson. He talks about how scarcity affects human psychology. So the economic system, if you look at the market forces, they create and there's this beautiful documentary by Adam Curtis called The Century of the Self, and how, Freudian uh, theory is used to influence people to make the economy benefit. So, to put it simply, it creates scarcity in the mind. No market force tells you, "Hey, you're an extraordinary human being. You're an empowered soul. You can, go out and do what you can and what you want." It says, "Hey, you are inadequate. You are inferior. Buy this deodorant, buy this shoe, buy this soft drink, buy this piece of chicken, and your life will be changed." And it can fill that hole of inadequacy which is in you. And then what a scarcity ends up doing to the mind is that uh, decisions taken from what psychologists call the scarcity mindset makes your life deteriorate. It makes people highly competitive and stressed, as opposed to something called the abundance mindset, which is about saying, "Hey, I have clean air to breathe, I have water to drink, I have friends, I have family, I have this culture and society. I'm grateful, and I feel abundant." And if that, and what comes out of that mindset is kinship, is mutual well-being, is a beautiful kind of growth. So psychologically, what the economic system ends up doing is that it creates a scarcity mindset in people and creates competition, which feeds an economy which is extractivist. Extractivist means that you use people, use resources to feed something which is linear and which the people at the top benefit the most.
Again, a little more slight digression here. But
So,
yeah,
mm,
but we are as a, I mean,
mm,
as a country, as a nation, and
mm,
largely the world, I think, sort
mm,
of is now moving towards a new neoliberal model of development. And
mm.
uh, what you're saying makes sense, but at the same time, do you see this happening anytime soon? Because I don't think so that India is gonna say tomorrow we say goodbye to capitalism and uh, tada. I don't think so that is going to happen anytime soon. Do you think so too?
So, how we will see this happen is partly in Gandhi's vision. He said India must be a huge cluster of villages. He had uh, that vision to save each, to include diversity in his vision of what nation should be. And I think we are seeing it in so many places. And sometimes we look in the wrong place because this kind of a change grows from the bottom. It sprouts like weeds here and there, and that's the only way it grows. It will not happen in the parliament, which then kind of translates, nationwide. It will not follow that top down sequence. It will grow from the bottom. And I think there are so many beautiful examples across India. Uh, um, that there is this writer called Brandon Firecracker. She's a Native American writer, and she talks about activism as something which is part of a gift economy. Because when you fight for a place, when you speak out for something you love and take a stand for it, it is completely outside of market forces and what the economy is interested in, and it's counterstream to that. And therefore, it's a gift, because when you give a gift to somebody, it is uneconomic in that sense. Um, and if you look at how dissent always grows ground up, you know. Um, so, yeah, those are my thoughts on that.
And switching gears, Yuvan, and moving to sort of the last segment
Hmm.
here. How do you look at India's climate movement and climate activism right now? And where do you think it's headed, and what are the gaps that you see?
Yeah. So I think one of the most beautiful things which is happening in India and in the world is that young people are coming into the conversation space, and they're saying, they're firstly claiming that space, and then
Hmm.
secondly, they're saying, the way in which environmental governance, social justice systems are working is not leaving behind a good world for us and for the generations to come. And I think that's a beautiful thing which is happening for democracy, because democracy is also across, is a horizontal thing. One of the ways we look at young people conventionally is that they keep quiet and they learn and then they conform and then they fit in. But then a breaking of that space and coming into the zone of participation, and speaking up, I think is one of the most beautiful things which is happening for democracy, especially with respect to the climate movement right now. And what is dangerous uh, is when that voice is not celebrated in the democratic context, but then all measures are taken to suppress that and to scare that audacity in young people. I think is a huge hack on the health of a nation we call democratic.
Hmm.
So that's that's one part of it. And the other thing about the climate crisis is that, you know um, it's experienced and it's a reality which is very, very varied in different contexts and communities. Um, for instance, if you look at the fishermen of Park Bay in Gulf of Mannar, in South Tamil Nadu, uh, for them it's fisheries uh, depleting because the corals are bleaching and they're not having enough fish. For a farmer, maybe it's about the rains becoming erratic and therefore needing to be dependent on loans and seeds and so on. So one thing we miss about the climate crisis is also the conversation is very, very socio-political as well, not just ecological. And the fact that what its experience is extremely different across the country, across the world, is something we should cognize, so that different voices are speaking about it, and not just a single narrative being put forward.
And on a closing note, how do you look at the recent chain of events and controversies that are happening when it comes to climate activists?
Disha is actually a very good friend. I'm a volunteer with the Fridays for Future India,
Oh,
and I've
wow.
been working with FFF India in various capacities for the past
Hmm.
1 year. And she was doing extraordinary work, and I know her personally. She's a colleague and a friend.
Wow.
Um,
Hope she's okay.
she, huh? Sorry.
I hope she's doing well now. I think
Yeah, yeah,
she's.
she's out on bail, thankfully, and she's at home.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
she was somebody who she was working on something called the MAPA, the most affected people and areas due to the climate crisis. So if you look at that, it is fisher folk, it is farmers, it is Adivasi communities, Dalit communities, women, the disabled, and the MAPA movement was really bringing out the voices and problems of these people who are at the worst brunt of the climate crisis to the forefront and to international platforms and so on. And that's how Fridays for Future India got involved with the farmer crisis. The farmers are communities which are directly in touch with the land and the soil. Something we urban people cannot do. We cannot feed ourselves. Um, and and when you're in direct touch with an ecological reality, a climate crisis will affect you far more starkly. Um, and so what she really did was she amplified the farmers movement in an international platform and uh, got punished for it. And that's a very, very sad thing. Not just her, Nadeep Kaur and Shantanu and Nikita and all these people who stood up for something they love and believe in, and uh, s- had the courage to speak about it and amplify it and ask difficult questions, uh, got penalized. And I think that's really a bad sign for a democratic future, and I hope that that reverses itself. And what was really healthy to see was the kind of outrage which came about. Apart from the fact that all kinds of rumors were being spread about, which I know for a fact is not true. There was this rumor about a Syrian Christian. There was this rumor about all kinds of things. She's a you know woman from Bangalore. Um,
And
what,
even if
what
she was a
was
Syrian Christian, how would it be any different?
no, the problem is how media tries to twist narratives to
Hmm.
for
Hmm.
demagoguery, to appeal to your emotions, to triggers,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
so on.
Hmm. Prejudice.
It doesn't matter who's from where. If you're standing up for a cause of environment or social justice, it really doesn't matter. um, but then what was healthy in that whole uh, uh, episode was the kind of outrage people across India and across the world showed, the kind of solidarity which came about, which actually ended up helping the movement. I think and I hope,
Hmm. Hmm. True.
and
True.
made people look this direction. That was good. But then after that, what happened? The IT rules of 2021 came. So all major social media platforms are now under complete control of the central ministry. That's
Hmm.
what this whole thing ended up in, and that those rules came about within a month of all these. So yeah, I have mixed feelings about it. Some of it of hope, and some of it of uh, you know not hope. Yeah.
Yuvan Aves, I think that was a very fantastic conversation. Really loved it and very enlightening. Thank you so much for being on the show, on being on Lights Camera Azadi. It was great.
Thank you, and thank you for I love this conversation as well, and the kind of space you're trying to create. I look forward to your future podcasts and the conversations you'll be having. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.